My question for you as we begin is, did you have an awkward adolescence? Probably not the question you're expecting on a Sunday morning, but I just remember how difficult that phase can be, entering into adolescence or teenage years as a child and coming out as an adult. And it's not an easy process by any means. You might be in the middle of it. You might be a teenager now, but even if you're old and going grey, you still remember how tricky that transitional time was. So much happens during it. There's emotional development and physical development. Your brain, your skin changes, your muscles, your coordination, thank goodness, changes. And you can't skip it. You can't finish it early. You can't say, I'm done with this and I'm going to move on. I thought of that as I reflected on the transitional time we're in at the moment in history, as in the whole world is going through it. And also, I know a lot of people going through transitional times or difficult times, waiting places, stuck moments, just personally in their lives. And thinking about how the importance of adolescence, the importance of, and we don't have a choice about this, tracking with our development and not skipping out early. But there are often times in our lives where we do try and we do actually succeed in skipping out early in these very important moments of transition from one phase to another. The pandemic has left us with this really awkward and difficult transitional time, and we were pre-COVID and we will be post-COVID, but we're in this strange, uncomfortable toing and froing of this in-between. We're home, we're out, we've got 25k limits, 5k limits, masks, no masks. It's necessary but really uncomfortable. And so we often all choose a position to be in and we say, well, we should be doing X, Y, and Z, and then we find all the sources that back up what we think. It makes no difference. We are where we are, and it's awkward and difficult and at times painful. And so I guess we just have to say we need to learn what we need to learn in this time. Use it for the best purposes we can. But it's not just about the pandemic, is it? It's not just about lockdowns and ways of handling a global pandemic. It could be for you the transition between one job and another job or career even. That difficult stuck moment in our career where we feel like this isn't right anymore, this doesn't fit anymore, but you're not on the other side of it yet. And so what we can learn in that time is really important. We can be in very difficult, stuck moments in relationships with a friend or a spouse or a family member of some kind. And we can easily just go, you know what, everything's fine, let's just move into the next phase. But it can't be done. We have to be wrestling with, analysing, reflecting on the moment we're in before we can successfully move to the next stage and know that we don't have unfinished business. It can happen in our workplace as we try and develop a new culture or a new structure. That can be a very awkward time, and sometimes the pin is pulled on that. And it can happen in moving from school to uni to work, course to course. It can happen in all sorts of contexts, and no doubt you've been in these transitional moments in your life. One that I was in I was part of a governance restructuring group at a church I was at, and we came up with this full new governance structure, which took ages and was honestly just really boring. But we got to the meeting where it was to be decided if it was to be accepted by the church, and the church said no. And naive me, I felt quite hopeful at that, because I thought, let's now do some work in this transitional moment to figure out how we get from a community that doesn't trust the process and doesn't want this new thing to being on the other side of that. How do we do that? And so we got in 2 consultants, 2 highly qualified, mature Christian leaders who would help us travel through this transitional moment, this stuck moment, this waiting place. They did an amazing job, but it was really, really hard work. and lots of meetings with people, lots of listening and reflecting, lots of difficult, awkward moments. And yet 12 to 18 months later, the work wasn't finished. And as is our human nature, whether it's for you in your transitional moment now or whether it was in this context, we just want to opt out. We just want to skip that difficult, painful stuff and move on to the next thing. And that's exactly what the leadership decided. This is too hard. This is not getting anywhere. This is not feeling good. And so we're pulling the pin. Thank you very much, consultants, for your work. But we are going to set up camp right here. It was like the promised land was just ahead, but no one could quite figure out how to get there. So we're actually just going to stay here. I don't know whether you've ever done that in your life, whether you look back and think, I could have transitioned so much better out of that workplace or done better in that relationship. And yet what I did instead was ran or developed really unhealthy habits, or you fill in the blanks. Sometimes we don't handle these paused moments very well. Sometimes we don't handle transition really well. And that's where I think Kate's song is brilliant, because as we look back and if we identify those times in our life, we know we can never be on the other side of grace. We are covered and completely embraced by God's grace. And so we have to remember that, whether we've transitioned well or we haven't. As I was listening to a podcast on transitioning this week, there was a really good, succinct kind of understanding of this transitional time with the pandemic. But soon after listening to the podcast, I opened up Isaiah 50, and it was really helpful to overlay this idea of transition and waiting place to what was happening in Isaiah 50. Because as you'll know, the Israelites often missed opportunities. They often missed getting the most out of a difficult scenario, whether they were under political pressure, whether they were suffering in some way through poverty or you name it. There were lots of situations that were profoundly uncomfortable for the Israelites. And what often happened when they felt stuck like that was they found their own answers. They distracted themselves with easy, shallow answers. They went after other gods, or they found their own political system to fix the problem and missed opportunities. So in Isaiah 52, God says this: when I came, why was there no one? When I called, why was there no one to answer? Why was that? Because they'd run. They'd fled that difficult moment, that transitional period, and they'd gone to find their own answers. The awkward, hard questions proved too much, and they ran away. And then God says, was my arm too short to deliver you? And you'll understand why the T-Rex image came into my head at this moment, with those little stumpy arms just not able to do anything. And we've all seen those cartoons of the T-Rex not being able to make himself a cup of coffee or fight another dinosaur. His arms are just too short. And well done, Nicole, for getting the answer to the Facebook question. God's hands are not too short. He's asking this question: was my arm too short to deliver you? No, it's not. Do I lack the strength to rescue you? No, he doesn't. And yet often we find ourselves doing the same thing as these Israelites, asking those same questions. Is your arm too short? Do you just not have the strength to take me out of this excruciating situation, this difficult waiting place, this transitional moment? Because that's how it feels. And yet God, who takes his time, and we all know that, does have an arm that's long, and he does have the strength to rescue us. Then in Isaiah 50, by contrast, we see the prophet takes another avenue, takes another way. In verse 4b, he says, he awakens me morning by morning, wakens my ear to listen like one being instructed. The sovereign Lord has opened my ears. I have not been rebellious, I have not turned away. He who vindicates me is near. This prophet chooses to stay in the presence of God, chooses to sit in the moment, chooses to open his ears and his mind and his heart to what God is saying in those difficult moments. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it is definitely the way to go, because the one who vindicates, the one who justifies us and rescues us and can take us to that next phase, he is near. And then he kind of goes back to those people who might be sitting in the dark. And again, darkness, waiting places, being stuck, they're all kind of these similar feelings, these similar situations. He says in verse 10, "Let the one who walks in the dark, who has no light, trust in the name of the Lord and rely on their God." We are sitting in the dark often when we're in these transitional moments, and yet this prophet is calling us to trust in God in those moments. And then he finishes this chapter by talking about those who choose to light their own fires. And tell me we haven't been there. That when we're in the dark, when we're uncomfortable, when we're tempted to run, sometimes we just say, "Don't worry about it, God. I'll just light my own fire. I'll just figure this out myself. I'll just figure out the way by myself, because clearly your arm is too short and you're nowhere to be found." But like that prophet, we need to be saying, no matter how I feel about this situation, God is near and he has things to teach me. So please remember, God is no T-Rex. His arm is not too short. Sometimes we feel like he's taking too long, and yet even in that we have to trust. Even there we have to trust that this uncomfortable transitional time that we can feel stuck is actually helpful for us. And that if we escape it too early, we're actually shortchanging ourselves, because we have so much to learn about going from immaturity to maturity, or from maturity to more maturity. It's a place where our faith can increase and we can develop into a more whole person. So we can say sorry to God if we've been looking for our own way, lighting our own fires, running from what we need to run from. We can stay near him like the prophet encourages us to do in Isaiah 50. Remember that he who vindicates is near. Terry Welling, and I'm not going to do him justice, he's written a whole book on this, and it's called Stuck. Now, full disclosure, I haven't read it, but it was a podcast of an interview with him this week. And just in finishing, I want to just briefly touch on 3 things he talks about in these transitional times. 3 things you can do. 1 is adopt a posture of openness. Even when what you want to be is defensive or self-protective, adopt a posture of openness. 2, reflect on what is raised during this time. So all those feelings, all those difficult things that come up, journal them, talk through them with a friend, or talk through them with a psychologist, or all 3. And 3, ask God to begin to reveal his purposes. Now, I would add a 4th, because don't tell me for a second that we don't ask God for a way out. And it's okay to ask. God, when will this be over? Is often my 4th go-to. So in all of this, it's a process of alignment. And by alignment, I really mean surrender. Saying, God, I'm yours. This is difficult, but I choose to stay with you. Align my spirit, align me with you. So, little excerpt from our theologian, Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go, which is a brilliant book, but just one little encouragement as we look at that difficult place in the story of Oh, the Places You'll Go, when the person has travelled down these wonderful, successful roads and then has a thud and a slump, and then it says, you can get so confused that you'll start down to race down long wiggled roads at a breaknecking pace and grind on for miles across weirdish, wild space, headed, I fear, towards a most useless place, the waiting place. I would argue with his theology there. I don't think they're useless. It's for people just waiting for a train to go or a bus to come or a plane to go or the mail to come or the rain to go or the phone to ring or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. No, that's not for you. Somehow you'll escape all that waiting and staying. You'll find the bright places where boom bands are playing. With banner flip-flapping, once more you'll ride high, ready for anything under the sky. Ready because you're that kind of guy or girl. I just want to encourage you that these difficult moments come to an end. And Dr. Zeus wants to encourage you with that too. That you won't always be in the waiting place. You won't always be stuck. You won't always be in this much pain. You won't always be in a pandemic. It won't always be confusing. We'll head to the place where the boom bands are playing. We'll head to the place where our banner is flapping and we can ride high. It's coming. But don't rush there, because we have so much to learn in the process about faith and trust and a God who has long arms and who can vindicate us. Let's pray as we finish and head out to our amazing long weekend. God, we thank you that you're a God who cares, who has long arms, who is mighty to save. We thank you that you've forgiven us, restored us, and set us on the right path. And as we find ourselves in these difficult, stuck moments, these waiting places, God, teach us what we need to learn. We surrender to you.